I'm Deborah Burke.
And your affiliation?
I'm a professor in the Department of Linguistics and Cognitive Science at Pomona College in Claremont.
And what has your research focused on?
For the last 33 years or so, I've focused on changes in cognitive functioning in older adults, particularly the effect of aging during adulthood on memory and on language.
So, for example, how would I notice that change?
Well, the kinds of things that older adults will report is that they are having more difficulty remembering words that they've known their whole life. This is something that cognitive scientists call the tip of the tongue phenomenon. It's where you know a word and you just can't think of it. And it's particularly problematic with proper names. And this is a part of normal aging, that it becomes that one starts to have more of these experiences. And what research on aging shows is that there also are some changes in the ability to learn new information. So it'll take older adults a little bit longer to learn new information. But there is also, we've learned, and my research has shown this, that there are a lot of aspects of cognition that don't change with age at all. And in fact, language comprehension, understanding language, understanding the meaning of words, these are all things that are very well maintained with age. And in fact, vocabulary increases throughout adulthood and doesn't start to level off until well into the late 70s. So that's an example of a cognitive function that really improves during adulthood. And in all of our studies, our older adults have better vocabularies than our younger adults, and Pomona College students are extremely smart.
It's interesting to me that you say this goes across all aging. If you thought you had a good memory, as you age, are you as likely to have tip of tongue as anyone else?
Well, the tip of the tongue experiences don't seem to be related to level of education or how intellectually active you are, as far as I know. But it is true that declines in memory function, particularly learning new information, are let me put this differently, that people who are more highly educated have some immunity towards catastrophic cognitive change in aging, things like dementia. And the way we look at this, people who have higher education will dement at a slightly older age than people with lower education. And this has been attributed to the fact that people are highly educated and intellectually active have farther decline before they cross some threshold where they are considered to show some signs of pathology. So yes, education and being intellectually active do provide some kind of buffer against that kind of catastrophic change. And in general, higher education is associated and intellectual lifestyle is certainly associated with the level of cognitive functioning during adulthood, throughout adulthood.
What else contributes to maintaining that level as you age?
Right. In the research that's been done, the things that have been identified are education level, maintaining active intellectual lifestyle during adulthood, and I can talk about that some more. Having a partner or a spouse who's smarter than you are is helpful in maintaining one's cognitive functioning. And also physical exercise. And physical exercise is actually very interesting because we've known for decades that physical exercise helps to maintain physical health. What we didn't know is that it also helps to maintain cognitive functioning. And there's now very clear evidence that people who exercise regularly have better, superior cognitive functioning during aging once they get into their 60s, 70s, 80s. So it's a very important factor in maintaining a high level of cognitive functioning.
I love the smarter partner.
Yeah. Right, and it's not hard to imagine what the basis for that is. So the idea is if you have a smarter partner, they're going to be talking to you about more complex ideas, perhaps engaging you in more activities. Social networks are very important for maintaining cognitive functioning, remaining active. The smarter partner may encourage one to enroll in classes at the local senior citizen center. All of those sorts of things that help people to stay connected to the outside world, to use their cognitive functioning, seem to contribute to maintaining it.
So, obviously this is a television show for a general audience.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the things and actions that people in their lives can take? And then part two of the question, or maybe part one of the question is, how soon do you want to start doing this?
Right. Well, I guess the first thing I'll address is the exercise, because this is really quite startling. And this is research that's really been developed in the last 10 years or so. And what it suggests is that, and we're not talking jogging or running marathons or anything like that, it's just walking. And it has to be done with some regularity, 3 to 5 times a week. If you can work up to a couple of miles, a mile or two, that's terrific. And it's interesting because it has to be aerobic exercise. But it doesn't have to be jogging. Walking is sufficient, brisk walking. And the control groups that they use in these studies, where they look at the level of functioning, so they will give people who are engaged in exercise on a regular basis versus those who aren't, various kinds of cognitive tests that involve new memory, that involve what we call executive processes. And executive processes are sort of the building blocks of human cognition. They're things like being able to control your attention, being able to resist distraction, to stay focused. And those processes in particular are well maintained with exercise. And of course, the early studies were looking at people who in their own lives were exercising versus not exercising, but there's a huge selection factor there, because people who may be ill are less likely to exercise. So there have now been a series of intervention studies where they take people who are all couch potatoes and they put some of them on the treadmill, and the others, the control group, they'll just give health information to. And after 6 weeks or so, you can see the difference in the cognitive functioning. It's really quite dramatic. So I certainly recommend walking. And there's some wonderful walking groups around. One of the groups that we have actually done some testing on are the Montclair walkers, who walk in Montclair Plaza, which is a great place to walk because if it's raining, you can still walk. When it's too hot, it's air conditioned. There are no cracks to stumble over. So I really encourage people to become involved in that kind of activity. And it's also social, because there are quite a few people who do this on a regular basis.
And you said 6 weeks you can notice the difference, but starting when? I mean, can you start at any point?
Yeah.
Or is
it's hard to know how early you have to start, and the studies that I know of have involved people of different adult ages, and I don't, certainly there's been work with people who are in their 60s and even 70s where they've started, so it's never too late to start as far as we know.
Have you done anything with, this is just my curiosity, with the Loma Linda Lopers?
No.
Because I think that would be an interesting group just because of nutrition, fitness, and they age forever in that Adventist community.
Yeah, I don't know much about the effect of nutrition on cognitive functioning. I suspect that some of the effect of nutrition is mediated by exercise. That is, with certain, there's probably a confound between what people eat and how physically active they are. I don't know. But the other things that appear to be associated with maintained function are remaining intellectually active and engaged in the community. People who, for example, in their spare time, instead of playing bingo, will play something like Scrabble or bridge, which really taxes memory, so that you are developing strategies to remember vocabulary words in the case of Scrabble, or to remember cards that have been played, and so on. And all of that appears to help maintain the functions.
What about, I know a lot of people do the puzzles, the Sudoku and things like
Right.
that. Do we have any indication that crossword puzzles or anything like that helps?
Well, it's actually interesting that you mentioned crossword puzzles, because one of the things we know that happens with aging is that we slow down a little bit. And what's interesting is the way that skill can compensate for that kind of slowing. In studies that have been done of people who do crossword puzzles regularly, and they've looked at the time to complete New York Times crossword puzzle, for example. And older adults are faster than younger adults. And the reason is that the age is confounded with the level of expertise. They're more expert. But the point is that when one has a skill, and like doing crossword puzzles, and one maintains it by continuing the practice, you see very little, if any, change in the speed for doing that activity. And this has actually been done with musicians as well, where they hooked a computer up to a piano, and they tested young concert-level musicians and older concert-level musicians. And these are people who have continued to practice, and they practice 5 or 6 hours a day. And what they found was that there was no difference in the time between their keystrokes of their fingers between the young musicians and the older musicians. If you did amateurs, you would find a difference. And if you just you changed the task so it didn't involve their skill, it just involved pushing a button when a light came on, you would see the age difference even in the skilled, very highly skilled musicians. But doing the skill, the activity that they've done their whole life, there was no change in the speed, which is really, it shows that one can maintain one's expertise.
So does this work in, for example, for professors? I mean, can they continue to teach well into their 80s if they keep developing this?
Well, if they maintain it and their health is maintained. There is some evidence. There was a study done by a group at Berkeley that showed that in terms of comprehending scholarly articles, even if they weren't in one's field, if you compared young and emeritus professors, there was no difference in the ability to comprehend and maintain the knowledge, even though it was new information, whereas there was you get the usual age difference with lay people. So in the case of healthy aging, yeah, there's every reason to think that these skills like analyzing text, if continued to be practiced, will be very well maintained. And that's why it's important to have some kind of activity during the day that uses one's cognitive abilities, processes, to keep them that honed and functioning so well.
Over the course of this, what has been your biggest surprise?
Oh, I guess my biggest surprise has been the difficulty of word finding. I mean, much of my research has focused on these word finding problems, and particularly for proper names. I started doing this when I was in my late 30s, and I had older adults say to me that they would look at a picture of a movie star, they could remember all the movies this person had been in. They could remember the last time they had seen them in a movie, but they couldn't remember their name. And it was just a total blank. And one of the differences between the way older adults and younger adults respond to this is that older adults, for the most part, just are quite, some of them at least, are quite relaxed about it and don't try and come up with the name, because they know if they just turn their attention to other things that the name will pop up. And in studies that we've done, we've shown that most of the time these names do spontaneously pop into consciousness at some later point. And I was very impressed with my older adults that they had learned to do this. And now, as I myself have grown older and have more of these experiences, I understand what they mean when they say their mind just goes blank. There's just nothing there. They have a total blank for the name. So and we have people who come into our lab to participate in our research. These are people who live in the community. And we test them on various kinds of word finding problems that we have. And they ask how they do, and we say, of course, that they've done fine. And they say, oh, well, thank goodness, because I was so worried I was dementing. Because this is such an annoying problem. It's older adults' most irritating and annoying problem, according to various surveys that have been done. But they still worry that this is a sign of pathological aging, that it's not part of normal aging, and it certainly is part of normal aging. So that was a surprise to me.
Are there any tricks?
Oh, no, I wish there were. We're working on an intervention now, and it's a difficult problem. There are things that you can do to help yourself. I mean, so for example, if you are going to go to some kind of an event, let's say at a museum, or even to your regular exercise group, and you're worried about remembering people's names, because nothing is more embarrassing when you go to introduce somebody and you cannot remember their name. One of the things you can do is, before you go to the event, just say to yourself the names of the people who you think might be there. And that strengthens the representation of that name in memory, and will have an effect. We have research that shows that repeating these words does make them easier to retrieve at a later time.
If you never had a memory for names, are you going to have more of this?
Right. Well, we don't know, because people, you
don't do the test where it says, did you ever remember names? Because I know people who never remembered names.
Yeah, but it's also
Why should
relative.
they worry?
Right, there's no change. I never remembered them. Yeah, there are people, and they learn to compensate in various ways. But it's all relative, and I don't know if I trust people's evaluations of never remembering names. Some people are more sensitive than others, so we haven't looked at that.
Well, if you ever want someone who never remembered anything, any name, I'll give you my
Okay,
mother.
I'll keep that in
When
mind.
my mother comes out
Yeah.
in the spring. And she's proud of it. So we've talked about surprises. Are there things that you are doing personally because of this? Of what? I mean, are you conducting your life differently, or have you learned things that you're doing?
Well, I certainly exercise on a regular basis. That's for darn sure, because the benefits are just so clear. And because of my profession, I read a lot. I remember. I have to remember and practice remembering, and I do remind myself before I'm going to have social events. I remind myself who's going to be there, so that I'm prepared to use people's names. And the other thing I do, we know that with these word finding deficits that if we have one once for a word, chances are we're going to have it for that word again. And so, for example, when I first moved to California, I used to have word finding problems for bougainvillea all the time. And and oleander was the other one. These were new. I'm from New York. So I just said them over and over and over, and now I have no trouble because we know that you have word finding problems for words that you haven't used frequently or recently. and you can erase that deficit by using them frequently and recently. And that's, so for example, practicing the names of people you're going to see right before the event is using words recently. It makes them more available. And then with the bougainvillea and oleander, I just said them over and over and over again so that now I pretty much can remember them when I need to.
Do you think that Apple applications and Google are going to make a difference in this kind of thing? Because what I witness is that people aren't even trying to remember things anymore.
Yeah.
That it's, and I don't mean little things.
No, I understand. I understand. And it's interesting you should bring this up because there was an article in Science recently, which is a very prestigious journal, that reported some results that suggested that when, these were young people they did the research with, that when they felt something was saved on their computer, they didn't remember it. But if they felt it was erased, then they did remember it. So I had a student who just tried to replicate that result, and she could not replicate it. And she tested both young adults and older adults. And in both cases, it didn't matter if it said erased or saved. They remembered the information. So I don't know what to say. There is this belief that if you can Google it, you don't have to remember it. But that's the only study that I know of that suggested that if it's saved on the computer, that you might be less likely to try and remember it yourself. I don't know of any other evidence, and we couldn't replicate that finding.
Is there a gender difference in this?
In memory, in general, there is no gender difference, and we have not found one for word-finding problems either.
If people would want to be a part of this research, how would they go about it?
We really welcome anybody in the community who's interested in participating in our research. I mean, our research depends on the goodwill of older adults in our community. And by older adults, we basically are interested in people who are in their middle, late 60s, all the way up into the 80s. And they would contact me at Pomona College in the Department of Linguistics and Cognitive Science, and I would we work out a time that's mutually agreeable. We also have a small payment that we give people, but yes, we are completely dependent on older adults coming into the lab.
And do you follow people then?
We don't. We don't have a longitudinal study done right now, but we certainly do a variety of testing. We can discuss, it's not clinical testing, so we are not trying to diagnose problems that people have. It's really basic research. But after we do the testing, we discuss what it is we've done, what our goals are. We do have some interventions now that we're working on to help people overcome memory gaps as well.
The reason I mention this is I'm with a bunch of students at Claremont Lincoln and CGU who are
Mm-hmm.
50s and early 60s.
Mm-hmm.
And we're very curious about exactly the kinds of things we've been talking about, but also how to increase our capacity to do the things some of us have the grooves for and have the previous experience, but some of us, this is new.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting, it's more women than men who are doing this at this age.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm not sure why that is, but that is certainly interesting. One of the important things to do is to try and maintain one's skills, one's expertise, and you have to do that through practice, and remaining active is extremely important.
Anything else?
I can't think of anything else.
Bobby, anything you want to know on how to go out with a smart person so you can age well?
Okay.
Okay, we're going to talk about word finding in
Yeah,
any way you want.
so one of the reasons that it's helpful to rehearse words, to say them out loud, that you're worried that you might forget in the future. I mean, these are words that you know well. These can be the names of somebody who you've known for 20 years. And you might be afraid of forgetting her name when you see her in a couple of hours at some event. It helps to repeat it aloud a few times. And the reason for this is what we found in our research is that what causes this gap, this loss of the sound of the word, the inability to produce the word that you're trying to think, is that the connection between the meaning of the word and the sound becomes weak. And there are several things that affect the strength of the connection. One is how recently you've used the sounds of the word, how frequently you've used the sounds of the word, and your age. Aging tends to weaken these connections. But the problem is not in the meaning of the word. We know exactly what the word means if it's a vocabulary word, or if it's a person, we know exactly who the person is, when they've been. It's just the problem is getting from that meaningful concept to the sound of the word. So the way you strengthen that connection is by saying the word. And this is one of the interventions that people can use themselves by either repeating over and over a word that they've had in a tip of the tongue experience, or repeating the name of somebody who they think they might forget. And in fact, what started me on this research, literally, was I had a colleague who had retired. She was in her 70s, and she came into the lab to be tested. And she didn't think much of the testing we were doing because it was, at the time I was working on language comprehension, which is not a problem for older adults. And she turned to me and she said, "Debbie, if you want to investigate something that is really important, then investigate why I can't remember the name of my friend of 20 years when I go to introduce her." And I took her advice, and that's what I've been doing for the last 30 some odd years.
Thanks. Great.
Okay.
Do you remember, you wouldn't know Mike Ruskin's test, would you?
What's his test?
You apparently gave him a test.
Oh, when he was here. No, did he say what it involved? How long ago? Did he say how long ago it was?
A while.
Yeah, he says a while ago.
It probably was something to do with word finding.
Yeah, it was word finding, and he said that they had asked him about his fitness
Oh,
because
we give a demographic questionnaire where we always ask about whether people exercise, and the idea is that one of these days we may correlate performance with level of exercise. We have only done that with word finding problems where we did find a relationship. Looking at the Montclair walkers, we found a relationship between how many miles a week they walked and how many word finding problems they had experienced in our lab. So we did get some
So what is
relationship.
that's fascinating. So,
Yes,
so what's the kind of
what is the minimum amount? I can't tell you that. I don't remember what the range of miles was, but you have to keep in mind, I mean, we're following that up now. It's possible that people who walk less are also people whose health isn't as good. So there might be other things that would cause the word finding problems besides the lack. There could be what we call a confound.
Well, the reason I asked this, Bobby, you can stop rolling. The
Okay.
reason I asked